All right, so those are the generalizations along the empirical dimension. Now, what philosophical, as it were, conclusion can we draw from this? Well, the second conclusion maintains that these results support an important account of the nature of morality, namely that moral rules and indeed conventional rules are both psychological natural kinds. And indeed, the essential properties, and I'm from now on mostly going to focus on moral rules, the essential properties are just those specified in Turiel's definitions. Here's Turiel's definition: moral rules, objective prescriptive force, general not local, they involve someone who's been harmed, typically more serious. A little bit of a footnote here. I think it would be better to say, although one has to help out the folks in this tradition a bit because they're not as explicit as one would like, and that's fine. They're not professional philosophers. They're developmental psychologists for the most part. But I think the best way to put this is not that the rules have objective prescriptive force or that they do in fact hold generally and not locally, but rather that they are judged to have objective prescriptive force and hold generally not locally, making it clear that what we've got here is a psychological natural kind. Okay? It's a kind that falls into the category it does because of people's reactions. And also a sort of fine-tuning footnote, although this is really quite optional, I think it makes things a bit clearer, that I think a nice way to do this is to say that these three are the essential properties of moral rules, and that the fourth one can be treated as a nomological generalization, a generalization which specifies a law-like connection between moral rules and types of transgression, namely the things that have these three are only the harm or harm, justice, and rights related transgressions. Well, it seems to me that the conclusion that moral rules are a natural kind follows very plausibly from the putative facts that I've just laid out for you. There are moral rules according to these conclusions, or a class of rules which exhibit a homeostatic cluster of properties or a nomological cluster of properties. And furthermore, there's an important nomological generalization that members of the class share, namely that all members of the class involve harm or justice or rights. And of course, if that's right, there's an entirely parallel argument to be made that conventional rules, again, as defined by Turiel, are also a natural kind. Well, it's not surprising, obviously, that work in the moral conventional tradition, once it was discovered by philosophers a little bit late off the draw here. Turiel had been doing this stuff for 15 years or 20 years before philosophers became seriously influenced by it. But once they found it, it has profoundly influenced many of them, and also many psychologists who come from very different traditions in psychology. Why? Well, for a very simple reason. It's a profoundly important result if it's true. But alas, and this is what I'll be doing for much of the rest of the talk, it just ain't true. So what I now want to do is to tell you why, although morality may indeed be a natural kind, it isn't the natural kind that Turiel or that folks like Sean Nichols think it is. All right, so what I want to do now is to bring you a little bit more up close with some of the data. So as I said, there is a wealth of findings on the moral conventional task, but not everybody has been convinced by that first conclusion. And the dissenter, that's the generalizing the results conclusion, and not everybody has been convinced that those results generalize. And the dissenters have focused on this one, which, just to remind you, is the claim that if the transgression does not involve harm or justice or rights, then you'll get the signature conventional pattern. Okay? Well, that's where the focus of the literature until recently has been. And the dissenters, some of whom I'll mention in a bit, have claimed that many of them have been either anthropologists or psychologists interested in cultural psychology, folks like Rick Schwader and his students and postdocs. But many of them have maintained that there are many societies where transgressions which don't involve harm or justice or rights do not invoke the full so-called conventional response pattern. Rather, such transgressions evoke one or more of the signature moral response patterns. Well, there are a number of examples in the literature. Indeed, in a very nice article published almost a dozen years ago by, more than that maybe by now, by Gabanich, he lists at that time something like 20 publications assembling examples, and there have been more since then. But since time is short, I'll only mention 3. One of my favorites, and one early one, was done by Mordecai Nissen, who I believe was actually a student of Turiel, so in any event worked with Turiel at one point, learned the Turiel method and used it. So it's particularly nice because this study and the next one I'll tell you about from John Haidt used Turiel's techniques explicitly and exactly. Mordecai Nissen looked at children in Israel, and he looked at 3 different groups. 2 of those groups, namely secular urban children and children in Israeli kibbutzim, had just the same results that everybody was reporting. But the 3rd group were children in traditional Arab villages, and those children judged all the rules that they were presented with, or transgressions of which they were presented with, to be authority independent and generally applicable, despite the fact that, on the face of it at least, none of these involved violations of harm, or involved harm, justice, and rights. So amongst the example were co-ed swimming and addressing the teacher in the school by his first name. And note, of course, these are central components of the moral response pattern. So if Turiel's right, we shouldn't be getting them there. Much more famously, John Haidt used a number of colorful transgressions. John is notorious for colorful transgressions, like eating the family dog, which has been run over by a car, right? So it's roadkill, treating the family dog as roadkill, cleaning out the toilet with an old tattered national flag that you happen to find around, and most notoriously that. And John has gotten himself in trouble a little bit. So in a popular online magazine, I think it's Slate, this appeared in a discussion. But moving right along, what John found was that in both the United States and in Brazil, low socioeconomic status participants judged these non-harm involving transgressions to be authority independent and generally applicable. And again, these are central components of the signature moral response pattern. Final study I want to tell you about is one done recently by Sean Nichols. And what Sean did is focus on another class of non-harm transgressions, namely transgressions of rules of etiquette. So he compared rules that prohibit disgusting behavior, like a dinner guest snorting into, I'm not quite sure what snorting is, so don't think it's something disgusting. Snorting and spitting, I guess clearing your throat and spitting into your glass of water and then taking a drink during a dinner party, versus rules that prohibit non-disgusting behavior, like a dinner guest drinking tomato soup out of the bowl. What Sean found was that with children, the disgusting transgressions evoked the signature moral responses, or at least 3 of them. They were more serious, they were not authority dependent, and they generalized to other groups. The non-disgusting ones got the standard signature conventional pattern. So you've got moral pattern for disgusting ones, non-moral pattern for non-disgusting ones. Okay? With adults on the same material, or at least university students, on the same material, what he got was that the disgusting transgressions evoked two of the moral response patterns, more serious and not authority dependent, but they didn't generalize to other groups. Okay?